Hey, it is the Fatboy Show on RX Radio. I hope you're doing okay today and enjoying your morning with us. Thank you so much for tuning in. It means so much to know that you're over there, wherever you might be, whichever corner of the globe. And yes, I asked because we have so many people that listen to us from Azerbaijan and Bangladesh.
Ooh.
And there's a way Ugandans can be in every country I don't even understand.
You find Ugandans in the most random places.
Random places.
The day we discover Atlantis, we're going to find a Mugerwa there chilling.
I'm telling you. Or Wakanda. But that's Uganda for you. And we are a beautiful country full of beautiful people, which, of course, some people have described Uganda as a fragile marriage of disparate, conflicting groups, right? Because if you look at our history, the way the country was formed, really, it's really by historical circumstance.
Yeah.
Wherein the colonialists sat one day in Berlin or wherever it is, Berlin Conference, if I remember my history correctly, and then they apportioned for themselves different sections of Africa.
Comfortably.
They said Germany takes this, France takes this, Britain takes this. And so in those specific geographical areas existed hundreds of different ethnic groups who now found themselves forced together to form a unit called a country or a nation state, of which Uganda is one of them.
Which was a brand new concept at the time.
Right. So whereas previously we were at odds with many of our neighbors, Buganda and Bunyoro, they had a fierce rivalry. And then I don't know, elsewhere there might have been rivalries too. I mean, everyone was doing their own thing really. And then when one day they woke up and said, okay, now you're a country. And then they abolished kingdoms. So now we're all under this umbrella called Uganda. And, you know, for the last, 60 years now? How long have we been independent?
I think it's about 60, yeah.
We've tried to move forward as a single unit. However, cracks seem to be emerging, wherein all it takes is a few spicy statements by a politician, and all of a sudden, everyone seems to be more conscious about their ethnic and tribal identity, which is causing a lot of worry for the political elite. Now, let's point to the events of several days ago. Bobi Wine speaking in Luero and making remarks that were considered sectarian and tribalistic, trying to say to the Baganda that they needed to wake up and refuse to continue to be exploited and to lose their land.
Yeah.
Do you think people are right to point to such statements and saying, hey, you're dividing us?
No, because that statement applies all across the board. That statement wasn't even tribal. That's just the general outlook of what the average person is going through in the country. We've heard of land grabbing everywhere.
Yes.
Right? Not just in northern Uganda. It's a war in Uganda. We've heard of families taking each other out over land.
True.
That is not isolated to tribe. Exploitation is not a tribally exclusive thing.
True.
Again, it's all these things that are going on in the background are not tribalist. It's just people being ruined. The problem is what we know from, if you study the wealth distribution map and all those other elements, you end up seeing that all the wealth belongs to a certain small region and group of people. And what scares me is pointing that out is treated as a bigger crime than actually practicing the act.
Okay, so is there not a risk, considering that the people involved in those schemes tend to hail from a particular region of the country? I guess what people are concerned of is that it then, because if you paint it with a broad brush, you then end up capturing vilifying others who may have nothing to do with it, but who might just share an ethnicity with the same ethnicity as those who are responsible. Because if you go to those areas from which these elites come from, you will also find impoverished people. Poor people.
Definitely. Always. But at the end
So isn't it unfair for them to be blamed for the sins of few among them?
It's unfair for the innocents to be blamed. I won't lie. But we have had blatant statements in tweets and things like that where someone pointed out no other region shall rule except someone from this side of the country.
Was that verified though? I saw some people claiming it was a forgery.
It was deleted afterwards, just like many others.
Okay.
But screenshot is bare and people keep doing that. Like people keep taking screenshots. So it's also, remember Bizonto was arrested.
Yeah.
2 years ago? about 2 years ago.
True.
For practicing tribalism.
Okay.
Yet all they did was point out that a lot of the main positions are taken up again by people from a particular region and sect. So again, the problem is not because tribalism has existed. I think we all practice it, to be honest. Like every time I'm talking to my aunties and uncles about marriage, like, yeah, you guys, I'm thinking of getting married. There's this girl I like. She's like this. You describe her personality, right? And chances are someone's going to pop up with a tribe. That one must be a Mugisu.
So actually, I would agree with the older generation. Look, it's not that I don't appreciate the romantic notions of mixing and being merry.
Yeah.
But I think when you're thinking about legacy, I think there is a certain value in trying to maintain the bloodline and to maintain the... And I wouldn't... I wouldn't begrudge anyone who wanted to preserve that.
Yeah.
Because think of it this way. The reason why, we celebrate cultural diversity is that these diverse cultures exist, and they exist because they were allowed to flourish in isolation, where they were marrying amongst themselves, defining cultural norms and cultural habits and cultural dress and cultural cuisine, to where they're distinct enough to be separate from another group who have their own culture and whole values. But now if you start
clear identities.
But when you start to mix it all up, don't you sort of lose that?
The mixing, in my opinion, considering where we are right now, I would want to have a Muganda wife just for safety. Yeah, because
personal safety.
Personal safety, and for the kids as well. Because what happens in a lot of these regions is when anything breaks out, everybody tends to become very tribal. So you've bought land in a region that isn't of your tribe, chances are you are going to face some difficulties. But if you're married to someone who's from that tribe and that region, you stand a higher chance of survival. Because it's more like, oh, okay, as opposed to coming and taking over, you sort of assimilated yourself into it.
Well, my understanding is that, just because you were married to a Hutu, it didn't guarantee the survival of, the Tutsi person who was married to a Hutu wife.
True, but it improves your chances.
Or husband.
And I have no problem with someone building their tribe, right? I believe there's nothing wrong with being proud of your tribe and your culture, because it took a while to build it. At the least you can do is be proud of the effort it took multiple generations to build this identity, right?
Right.
My problem is looking at any other tribe as less or expecting another tribe to bow to you. I keep giving this example of one of the biggest beefs I have with the Baganda. Expecting everyone to speak your language.
I think they just sort of take it for granted. When you have lived in this area, which is a vast area, and people are speaking it anyway, you just sort of assume that everyone else
the average person
should know it.
But then it gets deeper. When they speak to you in their language and you say, I don't speak Luganda, instead of switching to a language more convenient for both of you, the next question is, why don't you speak Luganda? Which I find the most tribalist thing to ever say. I don't go to northern Uganda assuming everyone in the north
in all fairness,
speaks it.
I understand that. But I actually do see some merit to the argument that you probably ought to learn Luganda. If you are a Ugandan,
in central region,
even if you're in northern or western region, because I think, isn't central Uganda the most commercially...
Luganda is essentially the business
language. It's the most
language.
commercially powerful area of Uganda.
True.
So it has the capital city, it's the administrative capital, it has the national airport.
It has Masaka, where they pimp cars. You can get 3 types of different animal skin on your dashboard.
But it just by default became the business language of Uganda. In the same way that we used to say, hey, if you want to succeed in international business, learn Japanese. Or now they will say, learn Chinese.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we say to children in Gulu or Naroa that, hey, if you want to be a businessman or a businesswoman, best learn Luganda to help you.
If you want to be a businessman or a businesswoman, learn maths. Honestly, learn maths. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with learning a language for survival. It's okay. But for someone to assume that everyone must speak your language, it's like how America preaches diversity and all these things, right? Oh, diversity of culture and all that. But everywhere they go, they do not respect the diversity. We show up and... Yeah, okay, so you guys need to bow to our whims. This is what I know, and it's going to be hard for me to change instead of adapting to what's happening there. That is where I find a problem. If you are so stuck in your culture that everyone else has to be like, oh no, oh yeah, you are the right one, and you don't feel the need to adjust to anyone else's, That's what I think I would call tribalism. Because at some point you're going to need to adapt. You can't go to the north and say, well, my language is the business language of this country. You all here should speak it. There you're starting a war.
Right. Although I don't think it's at that point where, people are...
We are not there yet. And to be fair, Bobi Wine's words riled up a bit of things, but I don't think he is the source of the problem.
So for how much longer, the question is this, for how much longer can this fragile marriage last? Because we saw, in Central Europe, the Balkans, in the 90s, the marriage could not last when Yugoslavia broke up into several different other countries, which are ethnically based. So it seems like multi-ethnic countries tend not to have a very high success rate in the long run. And if you look at the countries that are not only have existed for a long time, but seem to be more stable politically and tend to be more prosperous, they tend to be the more ethnically homogeneous societies.
Pretty much. Japan being a good example.
Japan being a very good example. Or Korea.
Yes.
And I guess... you could point to many of the Western European nations, at least until recently. So
when they let the immigrants in, you are making this really difficult.
No, but then
but your point is valid.
But because what happens when immigrants flood into these Western countries? Like if a Somali refugee lands in Copenhagen, and then the government tells him, okay, as a refugee, we're going to put you in this housing complex over here to assimilate. No, the Somali is going to be like, I want to be where the other Somalis are at.
I want to be a pirate. Show me the ocean.
No, like I want to hang with my people.
Yeah.
And so they will form their own clusters and communities within the host countries.
And that changes the culture, which in the end becomes problematic.
And it creates a lot of tension.
Which is what's going on right now.
Yeah.
But which is also what we're used to. I have a very petty reason why we should be united as a nation.
What's that?
Our map looks really good. Like, it sounds like the dumbest reason you could have for keeping a nation as it is.
Yeah.
But if you broke up the map of Uganda, it would look horrible. Right now, it looks like a beautiful woman with an amazing body wearing a gomesi. And I can with water at the bottom, and I can work with that.
But and I see your point. Although in the 70s, Amin he actually tried to redraw the map. If you look at geography textbooks that were published in the 70s during his reign, all of Mount Elgon was part of Uganda. So right now, Mount Elgon is divided between Kenya and Uganda, right?
Yes.
But he redrew the map to capture all of Mount Elgon and also all of Lake Albert and Rwenzori also. So our map got remixed a little bit. But anyway,
I like this remix.
As it is now, I would agree that it's aesthetically appealing. Although there have been calls. Speaking of northern Uganda, many northern Ugandan politicians want to secede from Uganda and create a Nile Republic, is the name I've heard being thrown around.
Oh, we cannot survive as part of South Sudan. It's not okay, even if it's just Nile Republic. I just think we're stronger, unified, and appreciating.
So you wouldn't
that.
want to be part of a Nile Republic?
Nile Republic sounds good in theory, but then you have the issue between the Nilotics and the Nilohamites. Which is a whole, like most of the beef between the Acholi and the Lao has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that, these other guys came with their own tribe, learnt your language and distorted it. Oh my goodness, beef. It's like those Chinese movies. You stepped on my garden, let's fight. And there have been a lot of petty squabbles.
Right.
So just cutting it into smaller portions, I don't think is going to change the issue much.
I think the more rational approach is to try to look beyond these ethnic sort of allegiances and rather just look at the bigger picture and say, hey, seeing as we are a country, let's make the most of it. But if people in the different regions are starting to feel like their leaders are favoring certain areas over others, it'll be easy to incite those feelings of disgruntlement. For example, when we look at many of the coups that are happening in West Africa, mostly it's because if you talk to the junta who are leading these coups, they will say that the government was not doing a good job dealing with jihadists. Burkina Faso, they're saying jihadists. Niger, they're saying jihadists. Who are these jihadists? They are the Tuaregs that occupy the Sahel region in the north of all of these countries.
Yes.
And these guys are in the part of the country that holds a lot of the wealth of the country, the uranium, the oil and what. And yet they are an impoverished region of the country. So therefore, they feel like, hey, maybe we should separate from these regions. In fact, they wanted to create their own Sahel Republic. I don't think that went very far. And so they want to sort of create their own entity, political and national entity, and divorce themselves from their southern neighbors. And that is just, to me, proof of the fact that when a government doesn't do a good job in ensuring that there is proper, equitable resource allocation,
Yes.
that those who occupy the places where the resources are going to be tempted to break away.
Well, that is a very fair point.
Right? Because
To be honest,
you imagine being a person from Hoima and you're seeing all these trucks with the oil and you're hearing stories about billions of barrels being pumped every day, and yet you can't send your kids to school. Aren't you going to feel bad?
It also gives you the idea that it's all a setup. Yeah, and for me, all I'll say is if you can learn how to be sexy in your language, I think that's a good way to appreciate your tribe, but also respect others at the same time. But also it teaches you, very importantly, that divide and conquer doesn't work for too long. That's for me, I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned from all this. Eventually, people get tired because you can't divide and conquer and have equality.
Right.
It's impossible. It's unattainable. If it is, then it's a very temporary fix. But in the long term, there's always going to be more disgruntled people than happy ones. And then that makes the others easy to turn on you. So in my opinion, this is a failure on the part of those who had the upper hand.
Okay, so given that these sentiments are being stoked by different political factions, most notably Bobi Wine lately, how should the government respond to that? To simply call it hate speech and lock him up, or are there actions they can take to quell those rising sentiments?
I think it would be nice, right? If we had more, me, I'm a big believer in people meeting up for stuff.
Okay.
I just invite a bunch of guys from different tribes.
And say?
Meet up, eat pork, drink a beer, chill, mingle with them. Because we take it for granted that the small things we say are no big deal. Yeah. Everybody thinks what's coming out of their mouth is not important until they start seeing the results or the repercussions, right? So when someone says, oh, in a bus full of people, I am the only human, the rest are equivalent to cows. You get? Or when we keep making statements like that, it is just about admitting and saying, you know what, we are all equal. Let's just live the best life. We have this guy, because part of the issue is no one is taking the time to actually analyze, what's it called? Jimmy Spire.
Okay.
On Twitter, called for an ethnic survey in regards to heads of departments.
Okay.
And all you have to do is, if honestly there was no problem, all you have to do is say, yeah, sure, cool. Because it's too late for a reshuffle. Yeah. All you have to do is do the ethnic survey and then give the credentials of the people who ended up in that position. But we are in a place where it's scary because a lot of people are thinking it may be too late.
So let's say such a survey was carried out and it showed that majority of department heads were people from a particular region of the country, say Western. So what does that do? That then means what?
We look like Disney. Diversity, equity, and inclusivity quotas need to start being filled. But on merit. I want a merit-based system.
But
is
would
what
it matter?
Would be preferred.
So what would you say to those who say they wouldn't care if it so happens that the best people for the job all come from one area of the country? So be it. What you want is not diversity. What you want is results. You want competence.
Hey, if there were results, I would not have a problem. I think most people wouldn't have an issue if there were results.
Okay, so that's the issue.
If the taxes were being spent the right way, if the roads were being fixed, if priority was being given to things where it mattered. I mean, we've been talking about Karamoja for how long?
I know, because Saudi Arabia are a monarchy. So no one in Saudi Arabia is complaining, oh, how come they appointed the prince to run this ministry and the prince and the princess to run the other thing. Everyone just sort of takes it for granted that, yeah, we are monarchy, so the king chooses his nephews and princes and sons and daughters. Everyone is with the program. I think our problem is the pretense. Our problem here is the pretense. We want to
Yes.
pretend to be a democratic modern society while operating as though we are a monarchy of sorts.
And people would just appreciate some honesty and say, okay, we are scrapping elections. I really would not mind as long as you put competent people in positions of power, which, if you're going to base on merit, is attainable. If you're going based on nepotism and tribalism,
Is a problem?
is a problem.
All right. Anyway, we are one people, one country. Let's make the most of it. And like Daniel said, let's sit down, have a drink, have some meat, because I know not everyone eats pork. Enjoy some meat and some nice music and nice women and be airy.
Of all cultures.
That's it.
Yeah.
All right. And keep listening to The Fatboy Show on RX Radio.
RX Radio.